Last weekend, WWE ran a live event in Texas with Jeff Hardy teaming with Drew McIntyre and Xavier Woods against The Bloodline. Less than 24 hours later, WWE sent Jeff Hardy home from the road. And a few days later on Thursday morning, Fightful broke the news that Jeff Hardy was released from World Wrestling Entertainment, bringing the number of released stars this year to more than 80. Although this release was not made due to supposed budget cuts. This was a situation where WWE was left with seemingly no choice but to cut ties with Hardy completely. He had what was deemed to be a rough night last weekend during the match, and you can find fan video of this on YouTube. Hardy sold for a long time when he had tagged into the match. He was moving slower and slower, which I chalk that up to just him selling, but I guess with him and his body being so beaten up, who knows? I'm sure there's a little bit of reality in there, but he was moving very sluggishly, and he made the hot tag to Drew McIntyre, at which point Jeff can be seen exiting the ring and exiting into the crowd. And security ran after him because they weren't expecting him to do that. And he hung around in the crowd for a little while. He just stood there looking back at the ring, watching the match. And as he continued to leave, he was taking selfies. He was being stopped every 2 seconds and taking selfies and posing with fans as he left into a different part of the arena, never to be seen again. And when the match was over, the referee, McIntyre, Woods, none of them knew where Hardy had disappeared to. They're looking around going, wait a minute, where's Jeff? Because they're going to pose now and celebrate their win. And they had no idea where he went. And then Drew even got on the mic and said they were missing a partner, and if you find him, point him over in our direction. Now, as soon as I heard that Jeff was sent home, my mind went to a bad place. Given the man's history, how could it not? You hope for an injury, because at least if it's an injury, he can heal up. But when I read that he was sent home, that was not a good sign. And people bombarded his brother Matt with messages, as they always do, and Matt responded on Monday night on his Twitch stream. He said, I did speak to Jeff for a little bit today, and he's okay. He's good. I think he'll be fine, but once again, this isn't my business, and if he wants to go into it in more detail, he'll do that himself. Jeff is okay, he is at home, and he is okay. It is not my business. It's not my story to tell or explain, and besides that, I wouldn't be able to do it justice anyway, because it's not from my perspective. So I love my brother, and I just want my brother to be okay and healthy. On Thursday came the news that he had been fired. Reportedly, WWE offered to send him to rehab and get him some help, which tells you all you need to know, I think, about why he was sent home in the first place and why he was acting a little erratic during the match. But he refused their help. And when he refused their help, they were left with no choice but to let him go. And it's a scary thing because it's the same thing that happened with Umaga back in 2009. Someone who Jeff Hardy is very familiar with. Jeff Hardy and Umaga had a bunch of wars in 2000 and maybe 2007, 2008. They had some pretty wild matches together. In the case of Umaga, he got his second wellness policy failure and then he refused to go to drug rehab, so they cut him loose. And 6 months later, he was dead. Now, if it's serious enough that the company, who I assure you, the company did not want to lose Jeff Hardy, because Jeff Hardy was probably the number 2 or 3 babyface on the SmackDown roster. They did not want to get rid of Jeff Hardy. If they thought it was serious enough, though, to warrant his going to rehab, I take that as a bad sign. Nor is the fact that he refused, knowing full well that if he did, he would lose his job, that's not a good sign either. This was not the first time that WWE has wanted to send Jeff to rehab and he refused, and it cost him his job. The same thing happened in 2003. And so he now sits at home for 90 days, at which point he would be free and clear to go anywhere he chooses. The fact that this happened to him before, I don't buy into this conspiracy theory I see, some people peddling on social media, that this was some sort of calculated move on Jeff's part to get out of his WWE contract on purpose so that he can go and work somewhere else. There is nothing calculated about anything that Jeff Hardy does. Just look at the last 20 years of his career. I would not exactly say that this is a calculating individual. That is not a word that I would use to describe Jeff Hardy. Impulsive? Perhaps. Calculating? I don't think so. I don't buy it. His booking in WWE has largely been shit going back the last 2 years. And he still re-signed with the company. He had the option of leaving last year and he chose to stay. He signed a 2-year extension under the condition that he gets back his old theme song, which he did. But if the man wasn't happy, he would have left when he had the chance, and he didn't. He stayed. So let's put that to bed here and now. I don't buy that for a second. On Thanksgiving Day, WWE dropped the latest episode of the Broken Skull Sessions with Steve Austin interviewing Jeff Hardy. And I watched it after, actually, I think the day after it aired, that Black Friday. I watched it, and it was good. I enjoyed it, as I do most of the Broken Skull Sessions that Austin does. Not the best one that he has done, but it was good. My main takeaway from it, though, was that Jeff really seemed to be in a good place in his life. He talked about his goal to become the Universal Champion because he had never won it before. And he said he would really love to get a good run with Roman Reigns. And again, this just adds to why I think it's just ridiculous, this idea that he would intentionally, do something to get himself fired, or like this is not a calculated ploy on this man's part. I genuinely believe that he was happy with where he was. He wanted to have a run with Roman Reigns, and he potentially could have had the chance. He was on the same brand with him now once he got drafted over to SmackDown. He was hoping to become the Universal Champion. He talked about having these ideas that he was going to pitch to Michael Hayes, because he's not really a guy who likes to pitch ideas. He doesn't go directly to Vince McMahon, but he's friendly with Michael Hayes, and he had this idea, and he didn't really get into what the idea was. I have a feeling it was Willow. It was probably the Willow idea. So he's talking about all of this, and he comes across as somebody who's very happy and very content with the position that he's in. I didn't get the sense he was just BSing because it's a WWE interview on a WWE show. I didn't get that impression at all. And he was openly talking about wanting to have one more good run. He felt he had one more good top run left in him, and he really wanted to work with Roman Reigns. Which is what, and I've been pitching that idea since before he even got drafted to SmackDown. That they needed some fresh baby faces for Roman to beat before WrestleMania. Jeff Hardy would have been perfect for that. Because the people love him. And you could tell that story about him wanting to hold the one major title that he has never held before. Now, there was no indication that there was any chance of that happening before WrestleMania. It's possible WWE knew something like this might happen and they didn't want to run the risk of putting him in such a prominent position. They had a chance to put the WWE title on him early in 2008, and they didn't do it. That was when he was as hot as he had ever been in his life. He was more popular than even John Cena was at that time. His merch was selling more than John Cena was. You go back, there was a period of time, 2007 into 2008, was the hottest period of Jeff Hardy's career. But then, 2 months later, after he lost to Randy Orton at the Royal Rumble in Madison Square Garden, they had the chance to put the title on him on that show, and they didn't. It was a short match, too. The match was maybe 6 or 8 minutes. He hit an RKO, pinned him. I was in the building that night, and you could just, it's like a pin got popped in a balloon, and the air just deflated out of the building. Everybody was so disappointed that he didn't win the championship that night. But 2 months later, he got suspended on a wellness violation, and he had to miss WrestleMania. And so it was like, boy, did they dodge a bullet by not putting that belt on Jeff Hardy. When he got his music back, recently, he's been wanting that No More Words song back ever since he came back to the company. Like I said, that was the one condition that he had before signing that extension last year. And then finally, they sprung it on him. Karrion Kross told this story on Twitter the other day that the night he debuted on Raw and he lost to Jeff Hardy, they didn't tell him or Jeff that Jeff was coming out to his old music. So when they play the music, Cross was on screen at the time. He was pacing back and forth waiting for Jeff to come out. They hit the music, and if you go back, you could see Karrion Kross in the ring crack a smile. He couldn't help but crack a smile because he's a big Jeff Hardy fan too. And he knows what that music meant to him. And then Jeff comes out and he's all smiles. He seemed happy. He was very open in the interview with Austin about his past problems with drugs and alcohol. He talked about the drug raid at his home, where the SWAT team kicked his door down. He's watching them handcuff his wife on the floor. Imagine the level of shit that you have to be in that the SWAT team kicks down your door. He talked about the Victory Road fiasco with Sting and TNA, one of the most embarrassing things that I've ever seen. One of the most embarrassing black eyes on that company in TNA history. And think of all the ground that covers. Was that Victory Road fiasco. But he was very open about that. The key part, though, was him telling Austin that getting off the drugs was easy compared to the alcohol. And that he recognized that this was his last chance to get things right. He knew that if he screwed up again, he would be done. He called it a miracle that he was even still employed by WWE and given all these chances with all the mistakes that he's made. He said, I can't mess this up. Because I have a wife and I have 2 daughters at home, I can't screw this up. That interview was probably taped a few months ago, but it aired on Thanksgiving Day. And exactly 2 weeks later, to the day, Jeff Hardy was fired by WWE. Addiction is an awful thing. You can have one good day and follow that up with 3 really bad ones. You can spend months, years even, trying to get clean and sober. All it takes is one day to undo all that progress. Jake Roberts has spoken often about this. You take things one day at a time. There are certain triggers that, there may be for certain people. It's touch and go. It's a daily battle that these people face. We just saw Jon Moxley, one of the biggest names in all of AEW, on the eve of a major pay-per-view match with Bryan Danielson that he probably would have won, and a major storyline with Hangman Page probably wrestling for their world championship. He took himself off the road and into rehab because he recognized that he had a problem with alcohol. And he took the steps that he felt were needed to get himself cleaned up. But then we have this report from the website WrestlingNews.co stating that according to a WWE source that was backstage at the live event in Texas last weekend, and this person reached out to the website, they were told that Hardy did not look like he was under the influence before the show. They don't believe he drank anything or took any pills. I don't know how they would know that, but that's what this person says. That he didn't drink anything, he didn't take any pills. They know people are wondering why would he be allowed to go out there if he was all fucked up on pills or booze or both. But the person told the website he looked fine before the match. Yeah, and that was the second time in that one statement, by the way, that they made sure to mention that. He looked fine before the match. Sounds to me like they're trying to cover their own ass more than anything. We don't know for sure what Jeff's state of mind was that night. Other than he was acting weird by doing what he did and disappearing. What was he not under the influence of something and just hurting and in pain? Who knows? WWE seems to have thought that it was serious enough to warrant an offer for rehab, and we know that Jeff felt very differently about that. Given his past, I can understand WWE's position. They were right to send him home. Is this a case where WWE overreacted and Jeff just had one rough night? Perhaps. But with his track record, all it takes is one rough night. WWE took action. They did what they had to do. And now it creates a big hole on the SmackDown side of things, but who gives a shit about SmackDown? This isn't about SmackDown. This isn't about wrestling. People are already fantasy booking a Hardy Boys reunion in AEW. His own brother tweeted on Friday night that he feels extremely good about the future, teasing a Team Extreme reunion. I don't care if I ever see Jeff Hardy in a wrestling ring again. I just want the guy to get his head on right and focus on his own well-being. He will be back on television. I will guarantee you that. That's not even a question. Jeff Hardy will absolutely be back on television. He told Steve Austin in that interview, "This is my last chance. I can't mess this up. This is my last chance." No, it wasn't. And there isn't anybody in their right mind who believed that. Jeff Hardy has been the luckiest man in wrestling for the past 2 decades. No matter how many times he fucks up, they always take him back. Few people have gotten more chances than Jeff Hardy has. Because he is over. People like him. He still has his legions of fans after all these years. People love, even his contemporaries, the other wrestlers, they love Jeff Hardy. They want to see him do well. They want to see his story end well. They want to see him succeed. And when you're over and you can make money for the promoter, they will always be willing to take a chance on you. It's a risk-reward thing. You weigh the pros, you weigh the cons, and you make your choice. He's very fortunate to have the fan base that he does, as loyal and rabid as they are. He is a very lucky man. Jeff Hardy will always be able to find gainful employment in pro wrestling if he wants it. And I think it'll be very appealing for Tony Khan to bring him in next year for a Hardy Boys reunion. Right now, though, my 2 cents, even if it is something as simple as just his body breaking down on him and he wasn't doing other stuff that night, but especially if it is something more sinister, wrestling is not where Jeff Hardy's focus needs to be right now.